Welcome to Every Child Belongs. I'm Kim Botto, an adoptive mom, grandma, and advocate for kids and teens with disabilities, as well as a longtime leader of kids and student ministries. In this show, we explore how we can create spaces where every child feels heard and valued, whether neurodivergent, differently abled, or they've experienced trauma. Every child belongs. We'll hear from educators, parents, professionals, and more, finding practical ideas that help build a compassionate and supportive world for every child. Let's get started. I am so happy to hear from my guest today, Dr. Erik Carter. Erik, I have been a huge fan of yours for a number of years. Your work has impacted my work. For those who don't know you, you're a professor at Baylor. You're also the executive director at Baylor Center for Disability and Flourishing.
Yeah.
You have done a ton of research and writing, which addresses the intersection of faith and disability. And what has really impacted me is when you talk about belonging. It's not enough to just make a wider bathroom stall. We actually have to give opportunities for people who are different than us, give them opportunities to participate and grow. You're also a collector of stories because you're a researcher, but you also collect postcards and national park pins. And every time I've heard you speak, you throw up a picture of a church sign.
Yeah.
Every time. You're also a husband and a dad of 3 kids. And what did I leave out? What else would you like people to know about you, Erik?
I think you've shared it all well. My passion is to help the church be faithful in this area and to live out what it's called to live out around belonging and believing together. So I think the passion hopefully comes through as well of really wanting to equip and support and call the church to the things we know matter most.
Right.
Yeah.
You are passionate. And I was telling you before we started, you have helped me so much in my work because I have gut feelings about stuff. Oh, I think, or I, but then you can give data that really helps people. I think it grows their empathy and their desire to actually make changes when there's hard data. So thank you. Please continue to do that. And I have some ideas for research that I'll tell you after this. So I know I always love hearing how people got into this field. And I know that you had a summer while you were a college student that made a big impact
Yeah.
on you. So can you tell us about how that really encouraged you to get into this work?
Yeah, Kim, I often say I stumbled into belonging
Mhm.
unexpectedly, growing up like so many of us did and maybe still do in a world that seems like is apart from people with developmental disabilities. So that's the world I grew up in when I think about my school experiences and work experiences and community experiences. So much of that happened in a world that it seemed like tried to keep people with and without developmental disabilities apart.
Mhm.
And so I didn't have the opportunity to encounter the friendship and the faith and the gifts and all the wonderful qualities of my peers who happen to have intellectual disability or Down syndrome or other developmental disabilities. That changed for me the summer after my freshman year in college when I had an opportunity to spend the summer in a mountain camping program alongside other 18 and 19-year-olds who happen to have developmental disabilities. And the friendships that formed were beautiful, and the faith that was shared was impactful. And the opportunity to just come to know a segment of my community that I had always been apart from ended up being transformative for me. So I discovered friendship. I discovered people who were invested in presence, who accepted me without condition, who befriended me without any sort of understanding of all the things that we think makes us great and just loved on me. So I experienced belonging through that. And I think, as you know, I often say that should not be a remarkable story at all. That ought to be the ordinary story of life lived together,
Mhm.
where people from all different kinds of experiences and backgrounds have a chance to exchange gifts and friendship in this way. So for me, that was my entry into the world of disability. That also was my entry into the faith because it was through the very patient, loving testimony of other young people with developmental disabilities that I became a Christian. And so that has set me off for all of these years on trying to help churches be at least one place where those encounters are actually likely to happen, expected to happen, because I think other people need to experience that faith and those gifts as well. So it's an origin story, but you can probably see the through line of why I
Yes.
care so much about rethinking how we gather as a church so that those kinds of relationships aren't prevented inadvertently.
Yeah, but your story is a bit different than a lot of people's, 'cause I think people see, "Oh, these people are being left out, so let me work to include," but instead, you came to know Jesus, and you came to know belonging and community through people who were different than you.
And because of exactly. It's exactly the story. There's another important part of that, and so you're naming a really important, I think, posture difference of, like, thinking about this as ministry for someone or service to someone.
Mhm.
My entry was service by and ministry by, people with disabilities, and that was what was captivating to me, as well. But I was a reluctant convert in a sense. So I didn't, what's not in the short version I shared is I didn't pursue that experience. I actually avoided that job and was stumbled into it. And so it took an encounter I might have been reluctant to have, would have been afraid to have, didn't pursue myself, but uh, having those opportunities for shared experiences stumbled me into new perspective and new relationships. And in many ways, Kim, I think that that's also part of what we're trying to do in churches is create
Right.
places where maybe we wouldn't pursue that particular relationship because we're uncertain about what to say or do, or we're worried we'll say or do the wrong thing. But when we have these shared experiences, those kinds of preconceptions and worries kind of melt away. And I think that's what we're trying to do is create opportunities for encounters with people we might not otherwise have thought we needed because then we discover we actually did all along.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I always say it starts with a change in mindset. What you
Hmm.
say is belonging isn't a program, it's a posture. So tell
Right.
us more about what does that mean then for you've alluded to it already about it's not for somebody, but what does that mean for the church?
Well, I think, relationships are the heartbeat of belonging. And at the end of the day, it comes down to being known and being befriended and being needed and being loved. Those are relational things. And I think we can create programs that serve people, that meet all kinds of pressing needs, but a program is not the same as a relationship. And in fact, a lot of the ways we do programming in our churches where we group people of certain kinds of experiences and design ministries for them end up preventing the breadth of relationships that they also need as well. So I think when I talk about belonging, the notion is really, how do we put people in? How do we support people to have the kind of opportunities to come to know one another, to know one another deeply and appreciate all of the gifts and things people bring, and out of that for friendships to form and faith to grow in community together. So a program can be a pathway to relationships, but it's not the same thing as relationships. And I think sometimes we just get so enamored by starting the next new
We
program, and
do.
then we miss that the only people who have relationships with the people we're serving are volunteers and leaders, and so many other people miss the opportunity to ever have those kinds of encounters. So when we think about belonging as not a place or a program, but the relationships that happen within places and programs, we raise belonging up to the elevated goal rather than starting a program as the elevated goal.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And your research has been about belonging and about
Sure.
faith, specifically the church. And I know last year when I was at Disability in the Church, which is a conference, it was in the
Yeah.
spring, and you shared some of the recent research that you've done. So, what have you learned about that we as church, as the church, and as believers that we need to know?
Yeah. Well, I think one is we are quick to proclaim that our communities are automatically places of belonging. Maybe because we feel that in our community, we assume that that's the experience of everyone in our midst. And I think we want to challenge that assumption that just because, as you mentioned earlier, we put everyone is welcome, all families are welcome on our church sign, doesn't mean that's how families feel in our midst. And that many don't experience belonging. So, one, rather than just assuming that because we've thought through things carefully, belonging will be experienced by the stranger to our community, we actually want to do the kinds of reflection that will help us discern whether that's really the case. So, one piece is let's really unpack what we mean by belonging. And when we take that question back to families, Kim, like yours and others, we hear over and over that belonging is about being present and being invited, being welcomed and being known, being accepted and being supported, being cared for and befriended, and being needed and loved. So we often talk about these as the 10 kind of dimensions of belonging. So I think the first thing is let's not assume that every person with a disability or family member automatically is being invited or feels welcomed or is experiencing acceptance or is being befriended or is having opportunities to be needed in that community. We need to reflect intentionally because many of these elements of belonging are often really elusive for many people with disabilities and their families. They
Mhm.
can't be presumed. We have to be very intentional, or they're not experienced. So that's really one important thing. The second thing that I really tried to, I think, came out strongly in our research with families is that their stories, their church stories, tend to break in one of two directions. They tend to break in the direction of feeling extravagantly welcomed in their faith community. And that's the story that we want to hear
Yes.
more and more and over, is churches that are coming alongside families in ordinary and extraordinary ways to embrace them and their children and to welcome and weave them into everything that happens in the life of their church. But the second way those stories break is towards deep wounding. And those are the heartbreaking stories of families who have struggled to find acceptance, who are often not invited back, who are encouraged to explore another church with a program for someone like their child. And you know the stories, Kim, as well,
Yes.
and you hear those. And those two pathways, I think, as any church hears those stories, says, of course, we want to be marked more by welcome and embrace than by wounding and exclusion. What they don't realize is that about half of families fall into each of those storylines. Almost half of families that of children with disabilities are leaving their churches because their experience is the opposite of all those elements of belonging. It's not one of welcome and being known and being cared for and being befriended. It's one of barriers or stigma or stares or all the kinds of things that lead them to leaving at one point. So I think knowing that those church stories can be beautiful ones, but often are not, is both a call on the church and then raises the question of, well, how do we become that kind of community?
Yeah, and just I wanna make sure we get that data point as far as
Yeah.
48% of families aren't feeling welcome. And I talk to a lot of church leaders who say, "But we're so much more aware now. We're doing so much better." And actually, the research shows we're not, because the research you did 10 years ago showed we were actually doing better then, right? And can you give us specifics on what it that 48%,
Sure.
what kind of things were happening to them?
Yeah, well, so in terms of thinking over the long haul, about 12 or 13 years ago, I was part of a study with Melinda Alt, Belva Collins. It was a slightly different sample, but I think there's a point of comparison. At that point, we found that 32% of families had said they left their congregation because their child wasn't welcomed or included. This spring, we repeated that study in the state of Texas, which is a pretty diverse state in terms of the kinds of congregations and denominations here.
Mhm.
That's when we found it was 47%. So it's interesting as awareness arises, it doesn't automatically mean that embrace follows. So what we have learned in those families that have left is some of the dominant feelings they feel. In fact, we actually we gave families a list of 28 different feelings that one might experience in church. Those that were ones that we would hope families feel, those we hope they wouldn't. And those churches that really didn't have intentional supports around families, kids with disabilities, used words much more prominently like feeling anxious or misunderstood or lonely or isolated or judged or drained. Those are the feelings that these families often have when we aren't thinking proactively about their arrival and how we might support and welcome them to be part of all that we offer. And it was a very different picture in churches that were intentional about support in this area. And I don't mean necessarily having a program, but are really thinking about, we expect if 1 in 3 families has a story of disability, we're expecting them to be part of our church.
Mhm.
What we put in place that helps allow them to be part of this congregation in the ways that are important to them. Those families and those churches use words like grateful and supported and embraced and included and loved. Those were the more prominent feelings. And so you start to think that, we want to be a church where everyone experiences those kinds of things.
Right.
And often I think the responses of churches is we're more aware of the families in our midst, but we still aren't confident on how we move in light of that awareness. We're still not sure of what we do uh, now that those families are known to us. What does it really look like to embrace those families, to change the feelings they feel, so that we're changing the experiences that they have? Yeah.
Yeah, because the churches that do have intentional or an established ministry, like you said, not a program, but they're thinking about it. I know some of the research that you showed that their kids feel more supported. They're growing in their faith. They're developing relationships and they're having fun. They're enjoying church,
Yeah.
which we want because then they want to come back. So what are
Yeah.
specific attributes that those churches have that make the kids and the families feel that way? So we can then do that at more places.
Yeah, I think, our this particular study was coming from the vantage point of families, so we were sort of really discerning the things that they named. I'll name a few that come to mind that might feel a little bit more abstract rather than concrete, but then we could talk about concrete supports.
Okay.
I think it is those postures, Kim, that you were talking about earlier. There's an awareness in those churches of who is in their midst, in their community. When they think about who is that biblical question, who is my neighbor, they're thinking about families impacted by disability as being among those neighbors. So there's an awareness component, which is important. There's a proactiveness, if that's a word,
Mhm.
a sense of anticipation that we're going to think about things so that the moment people arrive, we're ready to have those conversations about how to support people well. And I think another posture is one of reflection, of listening long to families and then saying, what is it about how we gather or teach or preach that might make church harder for these families? And what could we do differently in light of that? So there's a reflection that's happening in those churches. And so those three things are really critical for any church, is that we are learning who's in our midst, that we're reflecting on barriers and supports, and that we're listening to families to find out what they need most. That leads you to then very concrete supports. So those families talked about, well, someone's asked me, what would it look like to support my child well in the life of this church? And they put together a plan. They're coming to know my child and their strengths and their gifts, and saying, where in our church are those gifts and strengths needed? How do we connect them to opportunities to serve and to lead and to share? They're thinking about what adaptations and supports are needed for our curriculum, for our activities, for our programming. And they're thinking about things like buddies and sensory issues and those sorts of things. So the supports look different in every church depending on who is in their midst. So it's less recipe and more kind of, referencing these points of reflection.
So, Eric, you're giving us more specific, and I've heard you talk about not just within the church building, but where churches are offering support, like attending IEP meetings.
Yeah.
Or one church looked at their student camp and said, "Oh, our friends with disabilities, this isn't accessible to them, so we're going to find a new location." So I think it's important to think outside the church too, right?
Yeah. Kim, you're absolutely right. The most impactful ministry is maybe the between Sundays.
Mm.
We've got to be really thoughtful about what happens for a few hours on Sunday morning or whenever you gather, absolutely. But it may be that what happens on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday is actually the place that we really think about the real impact on families. And you named some things. There's more formal things. How do we think about respite for families that are stretched and exhausted? And that can happen formally, but that can also happen informally. Of one family just stepping into someone's lives and saying, "What can we do to give you a few hours to rest, to run errands, to go on a date, to relax, whatever it might be." It might be, coming along, helping that family in other areas of practical needs they have and need to have met. Transportation for a person with disabilities between Sundays, going out and sharing a meal, going for a walk, hanging out at the mall, going to catch a movie. Ordinary things that actually anyone knows how to do,
Right.
but do not happen automatically for families impacted by disability because we think we don't know what to do. We're not experts. So really calling on member Christians and their churches to think about what could we do the other 6 days of the week to really help families feel less lonely, to be more supported, to support their flourishing in the ways that matter for them. That's where I think the real impact. And that, back to your comment earlier, that's where it's relational. If I have a
Right.
relationship and a friendship with them, then I'm calling to check in on them on a Tuesday, and I'm stopping by to pray with them on a Wednesday, and I'm asking how that appointment went on a Thursday, or I'm going with them to that appointment because I know how hard it's going to be.
Mhm.
And that kind of knowing of families leads you to how we respond, what ministry would look like.
Yeah. Yes. There's so many opportunities, and really, you said ordinary. It's just think of the ordinary things that we do, maybe even for other people with typical kids, and our parents who are raising kids who aren't typical need that same kind of support and actually need it even more.
Yeah. Kim, I think you're right. I think, I don't want to put a percentage on it, but so many of the ways we support kids with disabilities and their families begins with the question of how would we support anyone?
Yeah.
And that takes us a long way. It doesn't take it all the way because there's also a very kind of responsive posture of there are going to be things that are unique when a child has complex communication needs or medical needs or behavioral challenges that are going to look different than other kids as well. But I think we so often perseverate on what's different, which leads us to
We
things that
do.
are specialized and separate and different versus understanding, wow, there's all kinds of ordinary needs that this family has that any family would have, like to be welcomed and included and known and befriended and invited. And we know how to do those things. We just don't know. We feel like we don't know how to do those for certain families. So I love that reminder. Do the ordinary and ask the questions to know what the individualized things you also want to do are.
What do you think it is? Is it fear? Is it fear that keeps us from doing it? What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I think there's still an element, a greater awareness of people, but not a knowledge of people. Maybe I didn't say that right, but like I think we are now more aware of sort of the presence of people with disabilities in their families, but knowing about someone isn't the same as knowing someone. And so there's
Right.
still that apprehension, that reluctance. I think we are afraid that we might not do it well. We might not do it right. We might not know what to say. And that vulnerability requires courage to step forward and say, it's okay. I might mess it up. And, but I'm going to step into that space because I'm called to do that. So I think there's an element of fear and uncertainty that combines. And I think also, to be honest, our culture, the speed at which we go,
Mm.
the
Yep.
pace at which we move,
Yep.
our heavy reliance on being independent and autonomous and on our own works against the kind of care and relational slowness that we have to have that many families and people with disabilities desperately need is that slowness and presence, and we're in a culture of speed and distance.
Yeah, we
So
are.
it's and the irony of that is what we're being called to, the kind of community that is required to really foster belonging for families and kids with disabilities is actually becomes the kind of community that any person needs. So we can't be passing ships on a
Yes.
Sunday morning, coming in and going out and care for one another. Well, you can't care for people with disabilities and their families that way, but it turns out you can't care for anyone
Right.
that way. So I feel like this is in so many ways like calling us back to sort of the first roots of what we're supposed to be about.
The basics.
The basics. Yeah. Thank you, Kim. Yeah.
I love all these ideas to create belonging,
Mhm.
and kids and students can be a huge part of it. So, how would you say, how can peers be a part of creating belonging
Yeah.
for their friends with disabilities?
Yeah. I think that's, it's, I think more and more our kids get it, maybe more than those of us who are a bit older. They're experiencing more opportunities for time spent together in their schools and classrooms and community groups. They're a bit more growing up in a world that's more integrated and sometimes more inclusive. So I think we can anticipate that many peers will feel like this is an ordinary thing to work on a project together in a Sunday school class, or to help one another and VBS, or to spend time together in a youth program. I think it's inviting them to be peers to one another. What are the ways
Mhm.
you ordinarily help your friends? Do those things also for kids with disabilities. And here's a couple other things that we can teach you and model for you that are some additional things that are going to be important for Ethan or for Sarah or for Alyssa. So rather than inviting peers to support kids with X fill in the blank disability, it's about asking peers to say, how do we help Sam be really part of all we do in this particular ministry or in this youth program or whatever it might be? And we're going to guide you in what that might look like and support you along the way. Peers tend to be fairly willing. Now, there's
Mhm.
always exceptions to
Sure.
that. We've got a lot of work to do. But I think the other thing is, when we think about peers is relationships are usually built on this foundation of shared interests and passions and common experiences. So finding peers who have the same love for certain kind of music, love for music, movies, or same sports teams, or love to shop at the same places, or root for the same, whatever. Connecting kids based on shared experiences and interests is the really the way we're introducing friendships into the picture, rather than finding the kids who are willing to volunteer to support kids with autism. We're
Yes.
pairing kids up who love the same things,
Great
supporting
idea.
them to be together, and
Yes.
that's how friendships end up getting formed.
And going back to what we said before, that's how all friendships form.
That's exactly it, and yet we don't do it that way. We look for who wants to volunteer to serve those individuals in that program, and instead, what is it that we find those commonalities and interests and make it much more reciprocal and mutual, rather than a helper-helpee as always our kinda defined posture.
Yes.
There's a place for service to people with disabilities, just like there's a place for service to anyone. But I think we start there and stop there, and
Right.
we miss the fuller reciprocity of these relationships.
As we continue today's episode, I wanted to let you know that if you're looking for more resources, strategies, and encouragement for making sure every child belongs, head over to our website at kimbotto.com. Sign up for the newsletter to receive exclusive content and insider info on future episodes. Don't miss out. Go to kimbotto.com and join today. Have as we talk about peers, I think one we can learn a lot from the siblings of
Yeah,
kids with disabilities.
yeah.
Have you learned anything in your research that we can learn from siblings or learn about siblings?
We've not had a lot of work focused on siblings. I literally was meeting not 10 minutes ago with a doctoral student here who is a sibling and is really animated by the notion of what could siblings do to show us the way,
Yes.
and how does churches minister to siblings as well, for example. So I think
Yes.
there's a real overlooked segment as we think about ministry to parents and then to kids. But what about those siblings? So, thinking about sibling supports in place, there are churches that have sibling support groups that invite siblings to present information or guidance about how to support their brother or sister with disabilities, hearing the testimonies and stories of siblings and how their faith has been shaped. Is another place, but very little research actually in this area. I think a real missed opportunity
I do
to
too.
learn from siblings. Yeah.
Eric, that's one area that I'm super interested.
Yeah.
I will send snacks to the team doing this research because, some places call the siblings the invisible kids
Yeah.
because so much has to be focused on their sibling with the disabilities. And there are things that they don't get attention for. But on the other hand, most parents will say their siblings are more empathetic, they're more compassionate. So there's a lot of good that comes out of it too.
There certainly is, and I think as we think about, the church being a lifelong support for, one of their members, those siblings are in these relationships for the long haul, and so, nurturing them, pouring into them, learning from them is really important for the long-term support of people with disabilities as well.
Yes. When you do your research, has there been anything, especially I'm really interested in this latest research where you looked at families and
Yeah.
parents and the relationship with the church. Was there anything that you just went, "Oh my gosh," that really surprised you?
I think, we're always surprised by the individual stories that we
Mhm.
hear. We often, we aggregate them up as if there's a pattern of all parents. But when we did this last study of 350 parents, that there's 350 individual stories.
Mhm.
And so I'm always just struck at one, um, by the beauty in those stories, the hardness of those stories, but the faithfulness in these stories. So when I hear
Yes.
a statistic like a family has left 6 or 8 or
Mm.
10 churches, and I hear the beautiful faith of that family that keeps at it in the midst of an unfaithful response, I'm blown away by that. So I'm often struck by just how deep and profound the faith is of so many families that I think might have thought would have long given up on this hope for belonging, and yet are persistent and faithful and keep knocking and keep pushing. I think that's always a beautiful, story. I think
Mhm.
the other thing that struck me is the very profound difference that intentional ministry can have on the storylines and faith of these families. It isn't, as you mentioned earlier, it isn't just about feeling more supported, or even enjoying church more. We noticed dramatic differences in the kinds of relationships that families form when churches are just attuned to this and intentional, to their sense of belonging, which is also important, but of ultimate importance of the growth in their faith. That that our efforts to do this don't just make it possible for parents to be present; it makes it possible for them to grow in and have a truly vibrant faith that then spills over to impacting so many others in their midst as well.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
think those are really important points to really call out.
They are faithful. I've seen, I mean, because to be turned away by numerous churches, but to continue to pursue your faith and to do that hard work, because it's very, very hard work for so many families to even get in the front door of a church, and then to be met with, well, as you said earlier, stares or looks like, "Oh, I don't know what to do with you."
Yeah. Yeah, I think the families, this faithfulness of these families is really encouraging, and I think the posture of these families. I think so often, I think churches think families expect perfection with this,
Mhm.
and I think they want a posture of a willingness to try
Right.
and a grace that they will often offer
Right.
when a church can't do it perfectly, but to know that they're willing to be long haul committed to figuring it out together. That's an important message for churches to hear. It's not to dissolve them of responsibility to do it really well, but I think in our perfection culture of if we can't do it perfectly, we won't do it all. The families are saying that's not what we're asking for. We're asking for just a loving investment, and we can help show you the way. But that posture is so important. And then in that, we do see beautiful examples of just creative ways churches are making this happen. So I'm hopeful in the stories. It's not a story of, well, if half of families are leaving, this is impossible. It's not that at all. Actually, it's well within our call and capacity as
Mhm.
churches to do the kinds of things that bend those stories towards much wider welcome, deeper embrace, all the things that we've been talking about. So I'm more and more encouraged that it's possible and not beyond our reach, and not a thing that someone else needs to do, but that I need to do and you need to do. And each one of our churches is called to this work.
Right. It's just not that complicated. I think we make
Right.
it too complicated and want to over prep. So as you were talking about the families, I believe that in most of your surveys you end it with a question on what is one wish that your family has for your church or the Big C church?
Yeah.
Is that correct? Is that the question?
Yeah, we've loved this question. We've embedded in a number of different studies asking kind of if there was one thing that you could wish for your church, what's the hope that you hold? And we've included that in our most recent surveys. Well, we also asked that of pastors and church ministry leaders and children's leaders and others. But I think the families, their heart's cry for their churches is really profound. There's so many things we could name that emerge from those wishes, but there was 7 or so that I shared that really jumped out to me as I think about this work.
Uh-huh.
Their wish for true inclusion
Mhm.
rather than separation, for a real heartfelt, deep embrace of their child as beloved and beautiful and gifted and not as broken and limited and challenged. They had a wish for volunteers and leaders to be confident and equipped in this area, to have that posture that we were talking about,
Mhm.
and to have just some guidance so that they can welcome and support their family well. They wanted support for the whole family, not just their child, but also the deep needs of themselves as a couple or as a parent, and for their siblings. And they desired for churches to not just babysit their kids, but to really invest in real discipleship for their to see discipleship as important for their child with intellectual disability as it is for anyone else.
Yes.
And then out of that, this desire for just a posture of being proactive rather than reactive, and all of that wrapped in this desire to like my faith matters so much to me, my faith community matters so much to me. I just want to experience the sense of belonging that so feels elusive everywhere else in my community. The church should be that place for
Yes.
me. So those are
Yes.
just a sampling of the one wishes, and I would encourage anyone listening is to ask that question of the families in your midst. What would be your hopes for our church? What's your hopes for the capital C church? I think you'll find them to be compelling, and you'll find that that a response to those wishes is well within your reach.
Yes. Yes. I have talked to families that have often the church hasn't asked them that, but they have shared what their hopes and dreams are with the church. And the churches have been surprised because often it's just they want them to have a place where they'll be prayed for and they can pray for other
Yep.
people, where they can play, where they can have
Yep.
fun. It's not they're not trying to get them to memorize scripture or to sit quietly during large group. So I think that is a great that is we should put that on all of our intake forms as we're
Yeah.
talking to families. What is your wish? What's your hope and dream? As as church leaders are listening in, and if they're feeling overwhelmed, as we wrap up, what would you tell them? How would you encourage them?
Well, I think one is, the work that matters most often can feel daunting and we can feel unequipped for it, but we're called to this work. And every place that we're called, we're also equipped to do it. So
Mhm.
know that the kinds of welcome and belonging we're talking about are within the reach of your church. You don't have to go it alone. It's the gifts and the people all exist within the midst of your congregation, and inviting them to this work collectively is part of responding faithfully to these wishes of families. So I want churches to know this is not an optional ministry.
Right.
This is the heart of the gospel. It's the way of Jesus. And so to also think you don't have to do it alone. There are people in your church who have experiences, who have expertise, who have passion that can be invited to join you in this. And more, there are others in your community who are also navigating this journey. You can learn alongside other churches as well about what this might look like. And I think I'm especially encouraged more and more that there are so many of these disability and parachurch ministries that
Mhm.
would be eager to come alongside you and guide you along the way. 25 years ago, when I first got involved in all this, there was nothing out there. There were no resources. And now there is really an abundance of them. And so knowing that you can draw upon the expertise and folks who are a little further along in the journey, I think should be a source of encouragement as well.
Yeah, and I would say 2 things to that. 1,
Yep.
somebody doesn't have to be a believer to help you. I have contacted speech language
Sure.
pathologists, OTs, that they want the kids that they work with at the school to have a place within the church, so they will help. And then also, you are very closely involved with Ministries.
Sure.
So what would you tell people about them?
Well, yeah, I've been on the board with ministries for now a couple years, and it's a disability ministry that is eager to support churches to do ministry with people with disabilities,
Mhm.
not for, not to, but with and alongside. And so many of the kinds of resources and starting points and guidance that a church would need is the kind of support that with is eager to offer and support. So they are learning from churches around the country and are eager to support and resources churches around the country in this way as well. So it's a really good example of an organization that has caught this vision that thinks that we can't worship and learn and serve apart from one another and be faithful, that we have to do those things with one another.
Mhm.
And is so eager for churches that say, we don't know what to do. We know we're called. Come alongside us, help guide our way. That's the heart cry of an organization like that, is to respond and step into that space as well.
Yeah, and I would say for With Ministries, they are friends of mine too,
Yeah.
and they have amazing resources for all aspects of disability ministry, but what I have looked at most closely is what they have for kids ministry leaders,
Yeah.
and they can help you from the very start, or if you are already established and you just need help going to the next level, they can help, so look them up. Eric, we end with some rapid fire questions, so you ready?
Oh, okay. Sure.
What's your favorite family tradition?
Oh, we love camping. We are national park junkies,
You
which is
are,
why I have
yes.
all of those pins. So if there is a national park within 8 hours, that's our tradition, is let's get there and hike and spend time as a family around a campfire.
What national park have you not been to that's at the top of your list to go to?
I'm missing all 8 in Alaska. So if there's any generous
Oh,
donor who wants to send me
send you and
there,
your family?
yeah,
Okay,
we've not yet hit the Alaskan parks, but almost all of the ones here in the US.
okay.
Yeah.
What is a memorable gift from your childhood?
Oh, I still remember getting my big yellow banana seat bike for my
Mm,
6th birthday, where you
yes.
stuffed the little card in the grill and it made it sound like a
Oh,
motorcycle.
yes.
I wanted a horse, but I got the yellow banana seat BMX bike. It was pretty close.
You were happy with it,
I
and
was
you
happy.
and you didn't have to feed it. You often include, as we said earlier, a photo of a church sign.
Yeah.
What is a funny or memorable sign that you have seen that you wanna share with us?
The funny or memorable sign. I'm not sure what one of the churches had recently, that they were a big billboard that they were voted the most welcoming church in all of the city, and I thought that was a really interesting sort
That's
of way to put
interesting.
that to a vote.
That's very
Um, but
interesting.
yeah, but my favorite I often share is the one that just says 1 Corinthians 12, we need you here ASAP.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
love that because it reminds us that this is not a thing that's just nice to do. It's a thing we desperately need, and that's, to me, is the call on the church.
Yes.
So,
I agree. Okay, this is the
yeah,
last one, Eric.
sure,
Finish this thought. Every child,
belongs.
yes, they do. And Eric, thank you for the work that you're doing to create belonging within the walls of the church and within the church community outside the walls of the church, too. I'm really thankful for your work. Now, if somebody wants to get in touch with you or find more about your work, how might they do that?
They can find us at the Baylor Center for Disability and Flourishing, which is just baylor.edu/disability, and learn more about our work, keep up with the latest research and some of the tools that we're developing to support churches like yours to really be serious about becoming places of belonging.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric, for being with us today. Appreciate
Thank you,
you.
Kim. Good to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining me today on Every Child Belongs. If you found today's episode helpful, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to share this with a friend who might need to hear it. Together, we can create a world where every child belongs.